So Michael Mann's crime saga masterpiece Heat has been highly acclaimed and highly influential for over a quarter of a century, but its recent 4K release has brought to light a very heated discussion about revisionist color grading, so I figured I'd go through every single major transfer the entire film's had on home video, to bring a little more context to one of my favorite films of all time. So Heat became a major critical and commercial success upon its release in December of 1985, garnering $187 million at the box office of a $60 million budget, bringing together two of the most celebrated American actors at the time, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, on screen for the very first time, and it still remains a pinnacle film of its entire genre here with its multi-layered, finely detailed characters and wonderfully interwoven themes and story elements. You have so much empathy for so many of the characters in the film, whether they're on the right side or the wrong side of the law here, because something Mann has kind of commented more on recent times, the fact that Lieutenant Vincent Hanna and Master Thief Neil McCauley, they're both protagonists of the entire film, because whenever Vincent Hanna's on screen, you want to see him achieve his objectives of stopping McCauley's crew and saving the day and stopping the crimes. Whenever Neil McCauley's on screen, you want to see him achieve his objectives, get away with the crimes, get the girl, all these different things. You want to see these guys really reach for that, and that's why you have that great scene in the middle of the film where the two of them have that wonderful diner scene in the coffee shop, and you get to understand these characters as very detailed human beings, despite what they do as professions and stuff like that. They're very much at odds. There's such a core quality between these two guys. They very much deeply understand one another, and they're only two guys in the world of this film. They're truly alike and truly understand one another inside and out. So it's a phenomenal film. I've already talked about it in another video several years ago with such detailed quality of it, but it's definitely one of my favorite films of all time. I look at this thing as just something that just reinvigorates my love for filmmaking, what I want to be as a filmmaker. So many ideas and themes and character qualities I want to inject into stuff I want to create are so much central in this entire film here. But of course, kind of famously, the film just got completely ignored by the Academy Awards. They didn't get any acknowledgement from them or the Golden Globes or any of the really big ones like the SAG Awards or the EGAs, anything like that. Just none of the big ones gave it any time of day. But the fact of the matter is, the film remains potent, pertinent, and influential more than 2.5 decades after its release. So, the hell with the gold statue. I'll take relevance and potency and legacy over that any day of the week. But the fact of the matter is, we look at Michael Mann's career. A lot of things where I'm talking about in the intro of this video here, the fact that he is a bit of a tinkerer. This guy was never 100% satisfied overall with a lot of his films and his filmography, because going through his films and looking at the various versions he's released, and a lot of times he's gone back and re-edited things or re-released things and things here and there and everywhere, there's quite a few of them. Going through his filmography chronologically, his theatrical debut Thief has a theatrical cut and later had a director's cut out on Laserdisc, DVD, and Blu-ray. The Keep, sadly enough, which I'll eventually cover in another video of its own, he never even got a proper version of this film released. He got it taken away by the studio, got hacked to bits, never got a finished version of it for himself. He's kind of distanced himself from the film over time, doesn't talk about much. Manhunter is the big one because there's 4 different versions available of that film. There's the theatrical cut, there was the director's cut that was put together for the movie channel the year after the film's release, which was released on DVD from Anchor Bay. There was a restored director's cut that kind of used the best film elements instead of relying mostly on the videotape sources, but did omit at least one scene from the previous director's cut release. But then there is a T-Check certified Anchor Bay release that's also usually the one seen on streaming services from Studio Canal. It was a bit of a weird hybrid type of thing that no one's entirely sure exactly where it came from, where it kind of uses and both omits stuff from both the theatrical cut and the director's cut here and there and everywhere. Very confusing version on the whole thing. Last of the Mohicans, there's a theatrical cut, then on DVD released a director's cut, a director's expanded cut, then finally on Blu-ray put out the director's definitive edition. Then you get up to Heat here, which has various things you could talk about in the whole thing. So there is 2 different versions in terms of edits on this whole thing we'll get up to when it debuted on Blu-ray. Insider got no revisions and whatnot, but apparently for its network premiere, which was split into 2-night event, there was an expanded version of the entire film approved by director Michael Mann, but it was never released on home video to my knowledge. Then you get up to Ali, which has 3 versions. Theatrical cut, director's cut, and then on the commemorative edition Blu-ray, yet another director's cut that is actually shorter than the previous director's cut. You got the collateral, which has not been touched whatsoever. It's completely fine. No one's made any adds to it. It's completely the exact same film on every format, every release, everything like that. So it's been maintained as a perfect movie. Miami Vice does have a theatrical cut and then a director's approved alternate version that he kind of calls it, but it's been marketed as the unrated director's cut. Public Enemy, as far as my research shows, no alternate edits. But Black Hat, the film really kind of broke me out. I really hated that film. I didn't like it one bit. But it has a theatrical cut, an international cut, and a director's cut. So a lot of these things are not something he did like, oh, I just went back and redid it like a few months later. Some of these things he did years after the fact, where he re-edited things and went back and changed things all over the place. He's a highly revisionist filmmaker. So he's one of these guys, he's very much a perfectionist. In terms of stuff he does on production as well, not stuff in post-production years later, but the fact is this guy is very, very clear exactly what he wants, and sometimes is not entirely exactly satisfied after the fact of exactly what he had produced at the time. So he goes back in there, he kind of puts scenes in, he pulls things out, reworks things, rejiggers things, does all kinds of weird types of things all over the place. So it's a bit of a mess. It's a very difficult filmmaker to really grasp onto and really work with to get things perfect the way he wants it to and have him be completely satisfied for years and years and years after the fact. So very much a hard-working, dedicated, fantastic filmmaker, but he is a guy who has a lot of indecision about himself over time, trying to like, oh, well, there's some things that could change here, some things that could change here. I know that feeling myself. Looking at some stuff I've done years ago where I didn't have enough talent, I didn't have enough equipment, I didn't have enough experience to do things the right ways. So they would look back on it, it's like, oh, we could do this 1,000 times better now. Or maybe if I went back and re-edited this thing, maybe better in this way and whatnot. But I try to avoid doing that because I like to kind of preserve things as they were. Talking about Heat is the very interesting one because it's very lightly touched in terms of re-editing. Because everything was theatrical cut from VHS and Laserdisc and DVD. But when the film came to Blu-ray, Mann decided on the approved transfer that he made for the original Blu-ray and eventually the remastered Blu-ray, he made a couple of minor edits to the entire film. This includes 2 dialogue omissions. First one is in the scene where Vincent Hanna comes back to the restaurant to see Nadine after he went to the crime scene with the hooker and everything like that. And it's a very interesting piece of dialogue that Mann decided to remove from here because just from the word selection alone, the word detritus. It's not a commonly used word in everyday vocabulary here, but the dialogue in the scene it actually goes like this.
You sift through the detritus. You read the terrain.
So going forward into HD and 4K and stuff like that with this new edit, Mann kind of goes from Diane Venora over to Al Pacino, then back to Diane Venora to kind of cover up this omission of line and whatnot.
You live among the remains of dead people. You read the terrain.
So, interesting type of thing. Just like I said, detritus is just kind of an odd sort of like particular writer word to kind of use in the whole thing. So I just feel like maybe Mann just felt a little bit differently. Maybe felt odd about the entire word selection, that type of line, because it's just that one little line. Everything else is maintained. So something in that regard there. But the second one is much more particular type of way because it's in the scene later on where then Vincent Hanna goes off to Las Vegas to kind of shake down Al Marciano Hank Azaria's character. That's the entire the big iconic dialogue exchange there, where Pacino goes off and says,
"She got a great ass, and you got your head all the way up it."
But Mann decided in these HD and 4K versions to cut out his response line after that.
Ferocious, aren't I?
So just a bit of an odd thing where Pacino, I believe he did do a little bit of ad-lib in that moment there to kind of get that piece of dialogue and stuff like that. So the ferocious line there just might have felt a little bit off. The man, after he thought about it for a number of years or whatnot, just felt like it wasn't really necessary, doesn't quite fit Hannah or something else like that. Just feels like it may undercut the previous line or something else like that, or just felt it was unnecessary. So just minor little tweaks. Those 2 dialogue pieces get removed from the HD and 4K version, so anyone who's very much a purist would want to get the Laserdisc, the VHS, or the DVD release so you get the actual original theatrical edit of the entire film. But let's move on now to the main topic at hand here, which is the changing color grading on Heat from one release to the next. And I actually have to kind of detail exactly what releases I have here, the kind of lineage and timeline in the entire thing there. First is the Laserdisc, released in August of 1996, followed by the first DVD, which was anamorphic widescreen, released in April of 1999, special edition DVD hit in February of 2005, the first Blu-ray, released in November of 2009, Director's Definitive Edition Blu-ray, hit in May of 2017 following a UK release several months before then, and then finally the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray with HDR10 was released in August of 2022. Now the one little quirk I have to get off on with the Laserdisc release is the fact that usually with a widescreen Laserdisc you have the image kind of vertically centered the entire frame here, so everything's just perfectly symmetrical top to bottom and everything like that, but the fact is on this one it's shifted slightly upwards. Now this makes me think of a lot of Japanese Laserdiscs where they would actually kind of shift things up so they could put like hard-coded Japanese subtitles in the black bars and whatnot, which is certainly the case for the Star Wars widescreen Laserdiscs, which were poured over from the Japan transfers and put on the US ones. And Return of the Jedi did not change that. They still maintained that being high up the entire frame there, and the original Star Wars had a little bit of a quirk in terms of how they tried to adjust that, which created another technical quirk, which you can go back to my Star Wars home video history to learn all about that in regards to whatnot. But apparently the US widescreen edition of Heat came out several months before the Japanese one, so it was August in the US and November in Japan, so I don't know exactly what the situation was, why that frame was shifted upwards for the widescreen edition. I don't know if that's the same thing for the widescreen VHS release or not, but definitely on the Laserdisc, that is the case. But talking about just how the film of Heat has always kind of particularly looked, it's always had this very distinctive sort of steely blue cast to it. And that's certainly a thing that's definitely been altered over the years. The Laserdisc and a little bit of the DVD has a slight bit of a magenta shift in some places here in terms of like how it got mastered. You can definitely tell that each one of these releases is definitely a different transfer, maybe a different scan, because the slight thing is that they all have slight framing changes. Some are a little more zoomed in, some are more pulled out. Some things are shifted slightly off to left or right or whatnot, so there's always a little bit of an alteration in that regard. Can kind of tip you off that they've kind of gone back to like the telecine and kind of did it over again, or some places like that, and did color grading alterations as each release went on in this regard. So very interesting type of thing to kind of pick up on as you kind of look through all these different releases, especially the DVD, because apparently the original DVD and the special edition DVD have the exact same transfer, but they have a different encode. The special edition one has a slightly better encode versus the 1999 one, but weird type of thing with the DVD is that the geometry in the entire frame is all kind of wonky. Everything's a little bit kind of horizontally squished. Everyone's faces look a little bit taller, a little skinnier and stuff like that. It's a little bit off to such degrees, and that's certainly a thing that some DVDs had at certain points in time. Certainly those earlier masters didn't quite get the geometry right. I know the early Blu-ray of Event Horizon from Paul W. Anderson definitely had a weird stretching issue that got corrected when the 4K transfer was put out in Screen Factory and later the actual 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. So certainly certain quirks happened in that regard, trying to readjust things when you had anamorphically shot films, or you had to have these anamorphic lenses or whatnot that kind of stretched the image as it passed through the lens onto the 35mm film stock, and you had to kind of, when you project it back out, you had to apply the actual anamorphic lens to the actual film projector to get it into the right geometry. So when you're scanning it in for DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff like that, you have to go in almost manually or whatnot, or hit a preset or whatnot to have it kind of stretch back out to its proper geometry. So sort of thing that didn't get right for the DVD, but was pretty much just fine in all the other releases, so anything in that regard. But when you look at how things kind of change, we're going up from the Laserdisc of the DVD, like I said, there's not much of a change. It's like you're getting better resolution, a little bit better color depth, stuff like that. When you get up to DVD, definitely the blacks and the contrasts are much more pronounced, they're much stronger in that regard versus the analog video from the Laserdisc and VHS. When you get up to the Blu-ray, things start to take a little bit of a different complexion. Not too much, it's just these gradual little steps you get forward, moving on from one release, one transfer, one scan to the next. And just the fact that the original Blu-ray in 2009 is not bad at all. Certainly is a very good representation of the film, but you definitely see when you're looking at comparisons, starting to tip just a little bit towards the teal. A little bit towards that. It's not egregious or anything like that, but you definitely see a slight shift in different places in the entire film where that sort of thing just becomes more pronounced. Again, you're getting more color depth. You get more, just overall, it's much more information you can have to create nuance in the entire visual landscape of the entire film here as you're getting it presented in these new resolutions. So It's nice that they didn't just go like an old DVD transfer and then slap it on the Blu-ray. They went to a brand new approved master from Michael Mann there. He approved this transfer and the later remastered transfer. So there's a little bit of thing on that regard. Okay, he grades it this way on this one, but when he steps up to this one, makes a whole bunch of different changes. Then you get up to the 4K and it looks completely different in many respects in that regard. So he keeps approving things, but he keeps changing his mind every time he approves the next thing in the line here. So it's a weird type of thing when you start looking at how the thing starts looking up on the original Blu-ray here. Everything looks pretty nice. I think this would probably be my preferred version to go to in terms of the visual quality of the entire film and how it kind of just represents the colors of the entire film. Even though it might not be entirely 100% accurate as we probably would think it would be to the original theatrical experience, I think it's probably the closest one we have in terms of just, again, the nuance and the variation of different qualities you have from that type of scan and whatnot to really get as much detail out of it that you didn't quite have with the DVD with its wonky geometry and the Laserdisc, which has a pretty good transfer for what it is, but it's still just an analog video transfer with Dolby Digital 5.1 audio. But when you're moving up to the remastered definitive director's edition, you're definitely seeing a lot of changes here. This is specific because Michael Mann had an interview with Entertainment Weekly. You can find it just fine and whatnot. He actually did say specifically that he went in and changed pretty much everything. He just approached this as if this is a brand new film he shot maybe a couple years ago, and he's grading how he would grade the film if he shot it now. Not as it is a preservation or restoration as it was in '95. He's going at it as how he would grade the film as if he had just shot it. It's the type of thing where Mann wasn't having that in his head of trying to approximate what he did before. It's like, just throw everything else out. Let me get it on from a completely new perspective and just do it the way I'd want to do it now. So that's certainly a thing that irks a lot of people. It's like, people so much want a preservation. Show me the film the best way you possibly can, but represent the way it was originally intended to be seen and the way it was originally presented in theaters and stuff like that. So as you see this whole thing, there's certain things where the colors start turning a little more green, a little more teal, whatnot, where blues and grays before are starting to have a little bit more of that kind of green cast to such a degree. And there's certain moments in the entire film where skin tones are much more warmer, they're much more saturated, they're much more pronounced to certain degrees, where before they're a little bit more kind of toned down, a little bit more muted to such a degree. And that was kind of the look of the film so much. It was so much that kind of cold, steely sort of exterior to the entire film, that sort of veneer the entire film had over it. It really gave it a certain sensibility about itself. It just gave that matured out sort of neo-noir sensibility to the entire film. Just gave it a certain vibe, a certain atmosphere to it. It's not maintaining that sort of cobalt blue aesthetic the entire film really had there. So it started messing with the colors. The film kind of takes on a different complexion overall. It doesn't feel the exact same way. If you change it too much, it really kind of ruins the mood to a certain degree. So I'm not saying that exactly happens with Heat, but there's certain films you could look at and it's like, you change that way too much and it just changes the entire vibe the entire film's going for. So how you go off the entire thing, where there's certain things like when they go into that big bank robbery scene, more than halfway into the film, you see through the lobby and whatnot, the entire sky turns yellow in this entire version. Before it was kind of a nice sort of muted color or whatnot in terms of like a blue sky or whatnot, but it's very much, again, changing the aesthetics very drastically in that regard. It just doesn't give off the same vibes it did before. It doesn't have that sort of grounded reality to it. It starts to change everything in that regard, make it feel maybe a slight bit off-center to that degree. So it's kind of a weird type of thing to go off and change things so much dramatically in that regard, especially when you get into the actual 4K release. The main thing in the 4K release that a lot of people are kind of like pinpointing exactly, and it's a big debate in the whole thing, depending on what equipment you're watching on, how high a grade of the stuff you have, all this type of stuff. It's the fact that the film just looks too damn dark. The fact that it feels like the highlights are like cut completely off and you just have like mids and blacks, and there's no real major contrast in our film. Everything feels like it's, every daylight scene feels like an overcast day, despite that they shot it completely in bright sunny days and whatnot in Los Angeles. The entire thing just takes on a very different type of thing where it's, like I said, it's much darker. And the colors are kind of a lot more blasé to such a degree. They're not as well, not saying they're as well defined. There's definitely a lot of definition, a lot more sharpness, a lot more detail you get out of this new 4K scan. It's on the remastered Blu-ray edition and on the 4K edition, stuff like that. But the colors just start getting a little bit murky in that regard. They don't really stand out as strongly. When you have the Director's Definitive Edition Blu-ray, the 1080p disc, and you go with the 4K with the HDR, it starts changing things in that regard, which just kind of brings everything down to such a degree where it's not very distinguished on screen how everything looks. But the interesting thing is that the remastered Director's Definitive Edition Blu-ray actually comes off a lot brighter than the original Blu-ray, but we can take that exact same 4K transfer and apply this HDR10 or the Dolby Vision HDR color grading in the whole thing. It just makes everything, just suppresses all the brightness and stuff like that off the entire thing. A lot of times in the entire film, the sky just looks piss yellow. It's not very appealing. Now, there's certainly a lot of people saying, like, okay, if you have the top of the line, state-of-the-art 4K TV, the thing looks fabulous. Well, most people watching it on stuff they probably didn't spend that much money on. I mean, I have a Sony TV that's a very good TV, but it cost me under $1,000, so I don't have the absolute best type of thing that has a QLED or something else like that. Some people do, some people don't, and some people probably still have that type of stuff and don't think the 4K edition of Heat looks very good. So there's a lot of debate in this type of thing depending on what equipment you have and stuff like that, what you're watching on, how good your stuff is calibrated and stuff like that, if it's professionally calibrated or something else like that, which also costs you a lot of money. So there's a lot of people who have a lot of money to spend on the entire setup here to have the absolute best type of thing. Maybe it does. Maybe it does bring out a lot of things in the entire transfer of the thing that the other displays can't, but I just feel like any good transfer, any good color grade, any new scan should look good no matter what equipment you really have. As long as it's a good, solid TV, it should still maintain that good quality when you have HDR10 or if you have Dolby Vision, add that type of thing for the digital version of Heat. Anything like that, as long as it's a 4K TV that has a good, solid backbone behind it in terms of the technology and whatnot, it should look good. Certainly if you have higher end stuff, it will look even more fabulous in that degree, but on my stuff, it still should look like a good transfer that I can watch and be pleased by it and stuff like that and be satisfied with what I'm watching. So it's a very heavy debate in this entire thing where if it looks great to you, then that's fantastic. I want people to be able to enjoy Heat any way possible, in the best way you possibly can, because it's one of the most fabulous films that's ever been made. It's a masterstroke. It's a brilliant film. It's timeless. But you still keep murking around with these entire colors, it really kind of messes up a lot of things for it. And I'm not very pleased by that. And that's why I'm making this video, kind of detailing that the film's going through this entire morphing change as every time it goes off, debuting on a brand new format, man goes in there with a new transfer and he proves a new thing, and then the thing he improves this time wasn't the exact same thing he improved last time. As technology moves on, he decides to go off and kind of redo things completely with a new perspective and not maintain what he did before. And he improved this thing, and then he improved that thing, and improved that thing, but none of these three things look any bit alike. So it's that big thing of an artist never being entirely satisfied with what they have, and always want to update things or change things or go back and do other weird things about it. I'm an artist myself. There's a lot of artists who probably watch this channel too, and they definitely have their own quirks as artists, what they're able to sit with and live with and be comfortable with and be satisfied with, and certain things they probably would look back on as like, oh, that wasn't very good. I could do better now, or I could go back and change all these different things and have it adapt to my taste right now or something else like that. A lot of things in that regard. Like I said, I've made my films as well, and I certainly would look back on things like, oh, that thing probably could have been done better now if I go back and re-edit, or if I shot it a little bit differently or whatnot. This would look better here or something else like that, but I'm not going back and reshooting things on certain films, whatever the case was or whatever the hell it was. It is what it is. I let it sit there and be preserved in the way it was, and I just let it live. So that's certain things. A lot of artists can't go off, and a lot of filmmakers tinker with a lot of things. Michael Mann is definitely a tinker, as I said. And so it's the main thing is like, I love Heat. I love the look of the film. But now that it becomes a much more murky topic. It's like, okay, what look do you like? Which transfer is the one you like that kind of goes towards the aesthetics you prefer for the film? So it's a very big type of thing, and a lot of people are very disappointed with the 4K edition of Heat. Some people are not, but the large majority of people I keep seeing are just saying the transfer doesn't look good. The HDR grading is too dark. It doesn't bring out the film very well. There's not good contrast. The colors got messed with way too much in terms of how the film looked before. I'd love to be able to see an original, like, preserved 35mm screen in this whole thing, whatever the case is. I'd love to be able to see that, to see how the film was originally projected and preserved and whatnot, to really kind of get a full sense of exactly how the film looked back in the day. But definitely, as my man has said in that interview with Entertainment Weekly, he did do revisionist color grading. He did approach it not thinking about preservation, but doing it as a completely new project from this point forward, thinking about what his sensibilities are at this point in time, and approaching it from that perspective. So I think at least he's upfront and honest about that type of stuff. Certain filmmakers not quite as much in that regard, but I like the fact that at least he's upfront and saying, hey, I want to do something different with the film. I want to approach it from a different angle, do some things that are going to change the aesthetics of the whole thing. And it's just the fact that I would like to see things preserved. If you're going to do stuff that's different and new on the whole thing, I'd like to at least see the original version of the entire thing preserved alongside it in an equal quality format. So that's all I have to say about that in that regard. So guys, I very much like to hear what your feelings are about this entire thing, showing the change, how this thing kind of moved and changed and morphed or whatnot, depending on the technology being used at the time, and then certainly man's sensibilities approaching at the time. Let me know what you feel about all that type of stuff. So this has definitely been a difficult video to kind of pin down and kind of figure out exactly how to approach this topic, and hopefully this time it really did, it's sticking this time. So guys, let me know what you feel about this whole thing. Of course, there's the likes, the super thanks feature if you want to contribute something specific to the channel, Patreon to contribute as well, and of course, liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing links around. That helps keep the channel healthy, allows it to expand, bring more people into discussions, and just have more things that keep this channel going in great different ways. So guys, thanks so much for checking out this video, and of course there's a lot of other retro video series stuff I've done before. Home video histories on the Terminator and Star Wars and numerous versions of Highlander and Highlander 2, and of course I'm planning one to be numerous versions of Blade Runner sometime in the projected future, whatnot, guys. So I got a lot of ideas, and we'll see where things go in due time. So guys, thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.